Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Terry McVenis, the President and CEO of RTCA. Greetings from our nation's capital and welcome to all of you, our fifth in a series of webinars, Aviation Technology Connect. Now, traditionally, RTCA has always produced an annual Global Aviation Symposium during the month of June. However, given the situation we're in these days, we've created an alternative means via this platform to hear from a variety of aviation industry leaders on a broad spectrum of topics that will educate you, further inspire you in your profession, and perhaps even evolve your thinking as to where the industry is today and where it's going in the future. We've had a very successful start to this series, exceeding all of our expectations here at RTCA. Our first four webinars have attracted an international audience of upwards of 400 people tuning in each month, not only from here in the United States, but also from Canada, countries across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, South America, Australia, and New Zealand. We've heard from leaders in the FAA, the NTSB, and other leaders from our aviation industry. We believe today's webinar will be equally exciting and informative. These previous webinars were recorded, as is this one. So if you want to go back and listen to any of our previous webinars, you can find those recordings on the RTCA YouTube channel. As I was looking through the registrations for today's webinar, I noticed a few old friends and colleagues that I haven't seen in a while. So I extend a special greeting to all of you. This includes a very special friend to both RTCA and to me personally, a former RTCA president and industry leader, Mr. Dave Watrous. Thanks for tuning in today, Dave, and I hope you're doing well. Today and throughout the balance of this year and into next year, we're going to be convening on the third Wednesday of each month at the same time to continue with this program series. And each of these webinars are going to focus on a particular topic where you'll gain some insights from aviation leaders that I'm confident will be inspirational, strategic, or even thought-provoking, with the primary goal of them giving you, the audience, the gift of their knowledge. Today, we're also going to be using this webinar to acknowledge several of our RTCA Special Committee members from government and industry that have done some outstanding work in the development of aviation performance standards throughout this past year. I'm most grateful to our sponsors from the industry that have come forward to help us make this series happen throughout the year. Without their assistance, this webinar series would not be possible. And for today's event, I'm pleased to have Collins Aerospace, the National Business Aviation Association, American Airlines, the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, Garmin, MITRE, and the General Aviation Manufacturers Association as sponsors for today's webinar. Today, our sponsor, Collins Aerospace, has a video that we're also going to be showing you. Now, on this platform, during the panel discussions, you're going to be able to submit some questions to our panelists. So to do so, just submit your questions in the questions box on your control panel, and we'll make sure the questions get shared with the panelists. Also, there is some material that our sponsors have provided for you, and to access that material, simply click on the handouts in the handout section, and you'll be able to download them to your computer. So let's get started. National Airspace Modernization, NASMod. It's something we've been hearing about a lot in our industry for quite a few years now. As I was preparing for today's webinar, I looked back into some of my old files and found the first mention of it I had of NASMod was in April of 2001, when then FAA Administrator Jane Garvey proposed a 10-year NAS modernization plan to revamp the US ATC and air navigation system, its facilities, its equipment, including the airports. It was called the NAS Operational Evolution Plan, or OEP, and it was a foundation for capacity enhancement. It was a 10-year blueprint that grouped capacity demand problems into 4 specific areas: arrival and departure rates, airport weather conditions, en route congestion, and en route severe weather. Now, I won't comment on whether or not that plan was successful. I will say, though, that it continues to be a focus of FAA, NASA, and industry. And I'll also add that RTCA has been involved in these efforts over the years, as we led the Government and Industry RTCA Free Flight Steering Committee in the late 1990s and into the 2000s. And today I'm proud to continue our involvement with FAA, NASA, and some industry efforts such as the Air Traffic Control Association's Blue Skies initiative, which I know you'll hear more about during our panel discussion today. So for now, I want to turn things over to Mr. Gene Hayman, who serves as the Director of FAA and Government Programs for Collins Aerospace. Gene brings almost 30 years of experience in the aviation industry, serving in several key executive positions throughout his career. Gene's very active in the aviation community, serving in different leadership positions on committees that are contributing to critical initiatives, including serving as chair of ATCA's Blue Skies initiative, which I just mentioned. He has a great panel joining him, so Gene, over to you.
Thanks for the intro, Terry. And in fact, as you were wrapping up the intro there, I was starting to think, wow, that person you're introducing has been around the block a few times. And then I had to remember, oh, it was me. So, but you know, folks, as Terry mentioned, you know, our industry's been going through modernization for as long as I can remember, and I've been doing this for 30 years. You know, Terry mentioned the OEP that was launched in early 2001. Shortly after that, we had an unfortunate event called 9/11. Shortly after that, Congress and the reauthorization bill put in Vision 100, which stood up NextGen, which I know most of us are familiar with. And, you know, NextGen was going to be a 20-year effort, you know, from 2005 to 2025, you know, looking at how to give the NAS better situational awareness, how to enhance safety, how to enhance security, and more so how to increase operations, more efficient operations. So if there's one lesson learned that we can take away from the time that we were doing NextGen is it's really, really hard to predict the future. I can remember in early discussions at some of the planning committee meetings that we were talking about, you know, this new thing that was just on the horizon called drones. And, you know, we were thinking, gosh, if we could get 9 drones in the airspace all across CONUS, man, wouldn't that be something? And now we have somewhere in the neighborhood of almost 2 million registered users of drones. So times have changed. So, you know, actually, if we go back to say 2007, 2007 was a critical year for technology. It was the year that the iPhone was first introduced, the first thing we knew as a smartphone. So let's say you and I were sitting down having a cup of coffee in 2007 and, you know, we were enjoying it. And if I told you that 10 years or so, that we would be talking about how our phones could control our entire household, as well as those cartoons that we used to watch when we were kids about, you know, all these, you know, automated flying machines, you know, that could take us anywhere and everywhere, and that we would have these heliports. You'd probably look at my coffee cup and wonder if there's something in it more than just coffee. But you know what? Here we are. Here we are. You know, with my iPhone today, I can control probably about 90% of the functions in my house, everything from my security system to my garage doors to spying on my kids, even to my appliances. And you know what? We're here talking about drones, urban air mobility, you know, automated or autonomous flying taxis, expansion of commercial airspace, as well as the possible return to supersonic flight. So today's panel is going to discuss, you know, with the advent of all these new capabilities, these new entrants into our aviation ecosystem, how critical is it to have a future-ready framework, something that we can use as guiding principles going forward, something that's flexible, dynamic, and evolves over time. So we all know that there's many efforts within our industry right now. There's organizations and folks out there working on looking at how do we integrate drones into the national airspace system. You know, there's folks, in fact, I was on a call yesterday about urban air mobility and these, you know, air taxis, whether it be Uber or Hyundai or these other, you know, great organizations that are building these platforms that are both going to be manned and unmanned. Looking at, you know, expanding commercial space and again, the return to supersonic flight. You know, all these efforts are taking place within our industry, but are they really being synchronized? Are they talking to each other? Is there an integrated plan to look at how it impacts our national airspace system as a whole? Are we looking at what capabilities can we leverage from the drone community into either urban air mobility or commercial space? So I tell you that there's just not really a lot of integration or harmonization between these efforts that we've seen. So in order to address this challenge, ACA has established the Blue Skies Initiative. So a lot of you probably already heard about it, maybe some of you haven't. Well, the Blue Skies Initiative is really an industry government collaboration to look across our entire aviation ecosystem and the entire aviation industry and look at how do we harmonize these efforts? How do we develop this future-ready framework that can help focus on modernization of the NAS, but not leave out any of the entrants that we're talking about, as well as there's a big, huge commercial operations that still has to take place. So how do we make sure that commercial operations aren't interrupted, GA and BA is not interrupted, but we share the NAS amongst all these new entrants, all these new users? So with me today, I brought some members from the BSI Working Group Committee, also an associate who I consider not just a former FA colleague, but a friend, and he's got a lot of experience with next gen as well as looking at new technologies. So we're going to briefly talk about what's it really going to take to kind of create and deliver this future-ready framework, as well as how flexible do we need to be, right? When we stood up this, the BSI initiative a little bit more than a year ago, hey, we were doing some great things. We were out there looking, we were, engaging industry and government on their modernization efforts and how do we start integrating this. And then somewhere early in this year, we had this thing called a pandemic happen, COVID. So how do we, in times like this, remain flexible and dynamic, that we continue to look at the future of our aviation ecosystem, at the same time look at things that are disruptors to our aviation ecosystem, like COVID, and what's the post-COVID recovery look like? So as I get ready to get started, I do want to give a shout out to a couple folks. As Terry mentioned, RTCA has been doing a lot of work in this area. So is FAA and NASA. They're working very hard on their own visions of what both the near term, midterm, long term of our NAS looks like. And in doing so within the Blue Skies community, as Terry mentioned, I'm the executive chair of the XCOM. We've got some great membership in the XCOM. So I've got my lovely dear friend PK from NASA, Don McLean, Jim Eck, Charlie Keegan, Pete Dumont, all bring a very specific viewpoint within their time and their career and within industry to kind of help guide the Blue Skies Initiative. But with that, let me go ahead and introduce the panelists. So panelists, if you'll be so kind to join me. Now, what I like to do is, instead of me trying to introduce each individual person, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to start with Frank. And then Frank, if you can tell us who you are, a little bit about your background. And then also, I ask each of you that right after your intro, if you can give just a quick 2 or 3 minute synopsis of your view of the world, how you view NAS modernization, and the criticality of us having this collaborative effort take place within the industry. So Frank, let's start with you.
Great, thanks Gene, and thanks Terry. Thanks for putting together this panel today. Very exciting opportunity to be here on this virtual stage with some of my great colleagues from industry. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Mom, for watching today. As Gene kicked it off a little bit earlier, interestingly enough, we do still have to deal with technology issues over time. When couldn't get my computer audio to work today, so I'm using this archaic device called the telephone today to dial in. So we are still working through modernization. My day job is Director of Digital Aviation Solutions at Thales, looking at the future of aviation, where we're going to go in a post-next gen world, looking more towards automated features in aviation in general, everything from the flight deck to airspace management tools for traditional operators, manned aviation and operators in the civil and military world, to also how do we integrate drones both at low altitude and higher altitude and accommodate commercial space, all while maintaining the safety and security of the NAS. So big initiatives ongoing inside of the company and externally. And my other day job, which Gene had alluded to, is the chairman of the Blue Skies subgroup committee that we put together earlier this year, which was initially intended to look at new entrants and how they interacted with the traditional national airspace system. But as we started the initiative, we quickly realized that we couldn't address new entrants by themselves. They're part of the aviation ecosystem. And to effectively make a push forward into advancing the NAS and advancing aviation in general, we needed to take a look at all the participants in the aviation ecosystem. So again, everything from the concepts that were pushed forward by NASA in the UTM TCL 1 through 4 activities, to looking at how Lance plays a role in the integration of UAS operators, to trying to make the system more efficient for traditional aviation players, commercial airlines, general aviation, small operators, all the way up to commercial space. You know, this really became the focus of where we were going with the Blue Skies initiative. I'll have an opportunity hopefully later on to talk a little bit more about that. But you know, looking at where we need to go as an industry, we're at a very pivotal time right now in the overall timeline of aviation. Gene mentioned the COVID situation. Obviously, we've been living through that for the better part of the year. That will continue to affect aviation for 1, 2, 3 years into the future. We had major challenges in front of us prior to COVID with trying to balance efficiency and capacity at our airports, trying to bring new entrants into the system. So in some respects, having a pause in aviation right now is maybe not a bad thing. Gives us an opportunity to catch our breath, look at where we want to go in the future. If we didn't have the pandemic, we probably wouldn't get this break. So in some respects, it's good timing in a way. It's bad timing for the airlines and for us that enjoy travel and getting out to see our customers and interacting with our colleagues in industry. But we're able to take a look to see what comes next after next gen. So how are operations affected? What are the capabilities we need to put into play? What's the future of the workforce look like? And how do we continue to evolve the system over time so that we don't get stuck with big programs that address only a certain portion of the aviation population? We really have to step back and take a broader look. So I'll pause there, Gene, and hand it over to whoever you think is next.
Frank, thanks, appreciate that. Let's go on over to Dennis.
Hi, I'm Dennis Sawyer. I'm the Managing Director for National Aerospace System Evolution and Systems Engineering and the FAA's federally funded Research and Development Center that's operated by the MITRE Corporation. The thing I worry about every day is how do we integrate all our MITRE work across our DoD, FAA customers in the aviation space, and be able to share that and communicate that and sort of our thoughts. To start with that, last November, we briefed the MITRE board and some invited guests from government industries on some preliminary thoughts we had as we're looking at what's beyond next gen. It was looking at what could that future vision look like. I actually concluded the briefing by stealing from Dan Elwell a quote he had when he received the ACA Glenn Gilbert Award, when he said, "It's an exciting time for aviation." And I look back at why we thought that back in November of 2019, and I believe those things are still true in spite of COVID. We looked at that the FAA has successfully implemented some key infrastructure initiatives that we can build on: ADS-B, Datacom, SWIM, PBN procedures, and while COVID has delayed operationalizing some of those next-gen capabilities, we've got a solid foundation we can build on. But we're also seeing lots of innovation in the aerospace industry, and I used aerospace on purpose because we need to be thinking about the NAS from surface to space. And in addition to all the new stakeholders and the business models that we're seeing, but we're also seeing that continued innovation in the information technology and communications marketplaces, both terrestrial and satellite. And we can leverage the innovation there to deliver new capabilities that really match the pace of need for to service those new stakeholders and business models. So we can imagine a future, and while it's hard to predict, as Gene said, we can still imagine a future where we've got more bandwidth available, we've got more computing power, we've got better information, we've got better analytics, and we've got more autonomy. And so in that future, we can start thinking differently about the NAS. We can think about the vehicles as nodes in a network. We can think about the vehicles as sensor platforms, and we can imagine, how can we use that sensor and performance information about the vehicles to improve safety and efficiency. I love Gene's discussion about the iPhone, because we used to have all these separate devices. I had a VCR, I had a weather radio. I mean, I had all these different things, and now they're in this portable electronic device that today I can file a flight plan. Today I can see other traffic. Today I can know where I am on the surface. And recent advances allow us to actually use those portable electronic devices and send information to a flight management system through an aircraft interface device. So imagine, as we have more capabilities, what can we do? Can we detect turbulence? Can we send automated pilot reports? Can we detect GPS spoofing? You know, so I'm just very bullish about the future, because I think in 15 years, you know, where can we be? There's just a lot of exciting things. And with that, Gene, I'll turn it back to you. I think the questions that we have to work are sort of the where, the why, the how do we come together on these? So.
Right. Dennis, thanks for that. And as I get ready to move over to Naveen, let me address the audience real quick. So there's a question function on this webinar. The panelists and I had discussed this earlier. We want this to be a conversation with you guys, not just the 5 of us sitting up here. So please, if you have questions as the panelists are talking, feel free to ask. We're here to answer your questions, not just tell you everything that we think, but we do want to have a two-way dialogue with you. So, but let's go ahead and move over to Naveen. Naveen.
Great, thanks, Gene. Thanks for having me today. My name is Naveen Rao. I'm an attorney at Atlas Air, which is a Part 121. Excuse me, sorry about that. Sorry about that. So I've been with Atlas about a year. And before that, I was with the FAA, U.S. Department of Transportation. And I was also at a company called Navras, which was a developer of PBN flight procedures. Just in terms of NAS modernization. So when I hear that term, I think of the term painting a bridge, because everything in aviation is kind of a long-term asset. Everything is built to last. So to me, NAS modernization began in 1981 with the Advanced Automation System that continued through 1994. And right around then, the FAA took what the remnants of the AAS, turned it into STARS, which has been continuing, I think, at least through 2016. In that period, NextGen came to the fore in 2003, 2004. And so for the last almost 40 years, we've been modernizing, upgrading, and changing the system on a continuous basis. But I think what's really interesting in the last 3 to 5 years is what we've seen from the new entrants, the commercial space, the drones, urban air mobility. So that's where I think the painting the bridge metaphor either breaks down or doesn't really kind of do justice to what's going on. Because when NextGen started, it was really about adding lanes onto this piece of infrastructure. Now, with urban air mobility, drones, and other forms of aviation users, it's really about accommodating entirely new kinds of traffic. So think of it maybe as like a bike lane, or something, or like a rail connection or something like that on this bridge. And the other observation I'll add is that the new entrants, in a relatively short period of time, have adapted and learned quite a bit. And so they went from basically being very notional, high-level ideas to flight testing and actually some actual live flight operations. And I think the pendulum swung. So they've accomplished a lot in a relatively quick period of time. And maybe we as traditional legacy aviation operators can apply some of the lessons they've learned to advancing some of the next gen initiatives that continue to take some time. And in fact, where COVID it presents an interesting opportunity, because the airspace is far more, it's less busy. There's a dip in traffic, and maybe this is an opportunity to accelerate some of these initiatives, drawing upon the experiences of the new entrants and others. So let me stop there and turn it back over to Gene.
And Naveen, thank you very much. Let's turn things over to Mike. So Mike, you're the one member that is not a member of the BSI working group, but invited you here because as you and I have worked together over the last decade or two, I mean, you've got some great knowledge, being a former FAA, working a lot of things, all things next gen, and got some great experience in, looking at, forward-leaning technologies and that kind of stuff. So didn't mean to steal your thunder there, Mike, but go ahead.
No, thank you, Gene. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. And Gene and Frank, I aspire to be part of the Blue Skies initiative here as we move forward. So hold me to that, will you? For those of you that don't know me, I'm Mike Hawthorne. I lead the Transportation Solutions Organization at DIGITALiBiz, and I also serve on NATCA's board of directors. And as Gene touched on, I've had a lot of cool jobs in my 30 years in this business. The ones I love the most are the ones that let me think about a different future. And so as we all know by now, and I love this about Blue Skies, it's not enough to just ponder cool new stuff for air traffic management, right? So that's fun. But if we don't also relook at the business processes needed to buy it and build it, we won't get anywhere. The slow, deliberate, I call it build a little, wait a while process that comes with government appropriations or continuing resolutions, that's no way to stay in front of technology, right? We also need a workforce that not only can develop and operate it, but actually wants to do so. And so I'm excited that BSI is looking at all this together, and I'm excited to start working with that group a little bit more. So, given where we are today, or why we're here today, I'd like to consider some things that we may have learned during this terrible pandemic that might actually help us move forward. So with all the bad that's gone on, for the past 7 months, we have kept the air traffic control system operating. We've kept most major programs moving forward. And we've been able to continue aspiring toward a different future. So telework has been far from perfect. It's been kind of interesting having people compare their hours spent on Zoom instead of competing their frequent flyer miles against one another. That's a neat little change right there. And honestly, where else can you get the unexpected excitement of your 7-year-old hopping into a budget meeting to see if you need a cookie? That didn't happen before. It happens now. So anyway, the idea of telework and the capabilities that make it possible, they've been around for years, but most of us were pretty certain that it just wouldn't work for us, right? So then we were faced with a pretty tough choice. Put our respective missions on the shelf and wait for this to be over, or figure out how to use these technologies that we may not be too familiar with, and maybe adapt the way we work in order to get the most out of them, right? So we had to revisit our assumptions on how we work together. We had to consider and accept new operating paradigms in order to survive. So there's a lesson or two there, I think, and probably some other assumptions we can also revisit, just a few of them. We spent the past 10 years chipping away at the idea that airplanes need to have pilots looking out of their windows. Pretty sure we all know better now. So maybe tower controllers don't always need windows either. Virtual and remote tower technologies are proven and ready. Let's get them into the NAS. Aviation has frequently led the way with more innovations and inventions than we can count, between us. But maybe it's time that our industry was more open to concepts that were developed elsewhere. For example, I know we've got scalable and affordable, simple data diodes that were developed for the energy industry, which literally physically eliminate back-channel cyber risk from our ever more connected world. Let's explore that. And finally, so much of our system was born out of government research. Now, taking away from the industry side of that, and MITRE, I know you've done a ton of great things as part of that as well. But maybe we flip that a little bit and provide industry a more natural landing spot for its innovation, where we can better protect their IP and maybe expedite its implementation by not insisting on changing it, right? So I look forward to working with Blue Skies on these things and other things as well as we move the NAS into the future. And so thank you again, Gene. Thank you, RTCA. This is going to be a fun conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
Hey, Mike, thanks. So before I ask my first question, there is a question that just came in from the audience. Want to know how this group, and I assume you're meaning the BSI working group, is engaged or coordinating with the military. And even though I know Frank can answer that very well, I'll just tell you that we put a call to action out last October, and just recently put another call to action out a few months ago via our BSI website. And we've got a lot of respondents. And today we actually have some former military air traffic controllers working on the Blue Skies initiative. So, we also have now set up a new group that we're kicking off called Liaisons. And these liaisons will operate as kind of a back and forth to have two-way dialogues with different organizations, different groups, some of the alphabet soup organizations, as well as into some of the other agencies. So Peter, hope that answered your question. But let me kick off with my first question. So you all did a phenomenal job at describing kind of where we're at today, you know, the paradigm shift we've been going through over the last few years, several years. Naveen, you hit it pretty well, is that, you know, we've actually truly been modernizing the NAS for 40 years when you look at it, right? We're in a constant state of evolving, which is what we need to do. If we're going to remain the safest, most secure aerospace and aviation system in the world, we need to do that. But we're at a crossroads. It's a new paradigm shift, kind of like what Mike was just talking about, right? So we suddenly have an onset of the advent of all these new entrants, right? Drones, again, urban air mobility. So there's great work, fantastic work being done within our industry. Again, I mentioned FAA, I mentioned NASA, AUVSI is doing some stuff. You know, the FAA's got the DAC that's set up looking, you know, from the Drone Advisory Committee. So all these things that are taking place, from your perspective, and this is a question for all four of you, from your perspective, how important is it to have an initiative, an organization, or some kind of model framework that synchronizes and integrates all these activities together? So, Naveen.
That's a great question, Gene. I think it is important to have that initiative to ensure, I mean, ultimately, everything that's flying needs to be interoperable in some way. And that initiative can come from any number of places. For instance, I think a lot of it's industry driven. So in the case of the new entrants, they are working, I think drones provided a particularly useful example. So as they work towards airspace integration in the lower tier of airspace, they needed to figure out how to deconflict. And so the Lance program, which really is kind of the interface between UTM and traditional air traffic control, and provides, for those who are unfamiliar with it, provides basic aeronautical information to users. So before you take your drone out and fly it, you know what NOTAMs are in place and what the conditions are, what the restrictions might be in that point in time. But it can also come from the FAA. I mean, I think the FAA has a particularly unique vantage point, because as the regulator of the entire airspace, and also as the operator of the air traffic control system, they have visibility into all aspects of this, and maybe have a kind of can see and anticipate challenges before they actually manifest themselves as a real problem.
Got it. Before we move on to the next question, any of the other panelists like to address that?
Sure, I'll jump in. I'd like to believe we can learn from history. If we look back at some of those examples I cited earlier, ADSB, Datacom, SWIM, you know, they've all had, you know, very successful government and industry activities that were very helpful. And that partnership was really important in order for them to realize the benefits. Now, ADSB did get a little help from some rulemaking, and not only the rulemaking, but that really an unwavering commitment to that rulemaking, so everyone understood that it was going to stick. PBN not quite as far along. So part of it due to the lengthy cycle for avionics upgrades. But this mixed PBN equipage really continues to impact our ability to realize all the benefits from the FAA's PBN investments and initiatives. And so while we've seen individual flights receive benefits, we're still struggling to get the full benefits from flows or from the whole system. And that one's moving forward because industry is working together on, and they're really nearing completion on a minimum capability list that will be a significant step to ensure that the forward fit aircraft are better aligned with what we're trying to achieve with next gen. And COVID is helping too, unfortunately, because of the aircraft retirements. And so, you know, can we learn from those experiences? Well, we know when it's important to be together and working together as government industry, and in the back of our mind, will we keep in mind, all right, when's a rule needed to ensure compliance or to really get us moving forward?
Dennis, thanks for that. So Mike, let me go back to you just for a minute. You mentioned kind of a paradigm shift that you saw with telework. Do you see something similar in air traffic control?
You know, it might be too simple to try to make a blanket statement like that, Gene. But there are certainly, as I touched on in my opening, our eyes were kind of open to, you know, looking at a paradigm shift away from or towards something we were all basically certain that wouldn't work. And I know that we're looking at all sorts of new things. Dennis just rattled off a bunch of them, and we've heard a bunch as we've been talking here. So I don't think it's a blanket statement where you can say, well, we teleworked, right? And so therefore we can change the way we do air traffic control. I think it would have been a shame 7 months ago if we would have said, well, you know what? The air traffic controllers can't telework. It's obvious, right? The air traffic controllers can't telework, therefore nobody can telework, right? No, you break it down into pieces, right? So there are some things that work in some areas and some that don't. Just because something does not work in one particular area doesn't mean you should abandon thinking about it for somewhere else. Everything is not critical. Everything is not on par with one another. And so I think my point is to just be open, you know, almost on a you're looking at everything from a system basis, but on a piecemeal basis, look at and be open to new technologies and don't discount them just because it doesn't look like they'll work for the first thing that you consider them for. Am I the only one that just lost Gene?
No,
lost Gene too.
no, sorry, it's that pesky mute button. You know,
It's the
that
only time you'll
technology
get the
was-
mute button on Gene.
That technology we're so used to. So
I didn't know we could mute Gene. That's awesome.
We talked already about NAS being modernized or evolving over the last 40 years, right? With the rapid growth of technology today, I mean, things change almost overnight, right, in our world today. But our business structure that we operate in the aviation community hasn't changed at all, right? And so from concept to an implementation in the field somewhere that an airline can recognize an operational benefit or somebody else, sometimes that can be 8 to 10 years, right? So I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on the importance of changing our business structure. If you have some thoughts and ideas on how to change that business structure, I think we all agree it needs to change, but what are some of your thoughts on that? Frank, let me start with you.
Yeah, I think this is one of the pillars of the Blue Skies Initiative. So as you mentioned, technology changes so frequently and rapidly nowadays. You know, you look at the start Next Gen, 2003, 2004, full implementation. You know, we can argue whether or not we've actually reached the full implementation. Yes, we've gotten some systems into place, but have we really reached the full operational benefit of those systems being deployed? I could argue yes in some instances and no in a lot of them. We're still not fully ADS-B equipped. We haven't decommissioned secondary surveillance radars. Datacom probably hasn't gone to the fullest extent possible to realize the benefits that could be there through that program. So, you know, as we use history as kind of the litmus, and looking at coming to the end of Next Gen, moving towards Vision 2035, and then Vision 2045. I think, you know, answering this in the context of the Blue Skies Initiative, again, one of our pillars is the business process. We have this gap in time between 2021 through 2035, and at some point in time, some magic has to happen in this grandiose space. What we've been looking at in terms of the working committee, the discussions we've had, we've looked at everything from operational concepts to new business practices to ensuring that the NAS becomes agile over time. So business process is a big one for us. So as we look to get technologies into operation, again, using the past is kind of is a good meter to do that. We used to have the old ATOP days, and we used to do things at the regional level to get technology into the field, to test it. And sometimes those things turn into national programs, sometimes they turn into pet projects. I think there's probably something to be said for those types of activities as we look to modernizing the NAS full scale. We're careful not to talk about technology specifically in our working group. We're talking about operations and capabilities and talking about how different personas interact with the NAS. And that's really going to drive how we get technology solutions, better procedures in place, tools for our air traffic controllers, on a way towards increasing automation through the system. Not getting to autonomous. I think that's George Jetson way in the future, but more automated systems, I think, is where we have to go. And I think business process is a big one. The AMS process is supposed to allow us to get through concept development, concept exploration in a very quick manner. And I think we can still leverage some of the AMS capabilities that are there to get technologies out there, get some lessons learned, do some fly-offs, and have those inform the bigger, broader programs that are going to get out and be part of Vision 2035 and NASA's 2045 for the true integrated NAS. We can't continue to do things sort of on an ad hoc basis and look at little activities here or there. We actually have to go out and fly these things. We have to test systems in the field. We have to get true operational data. Desktop simulations and those sorts of things are interesting at the very early onset to calculate the what ifs and ensure that we're not creating a very unsafe situation in the airspace. But we actually need to get into the field. Somebody like the UAS operators who are clamoring for entry into the airspace system, how do we create a sanitized airspace for them to operate within, keep manned aviation out, learn some lessons there, collect some data, look at technology implementations, and really inform policy, which is ultimately where we have to get to for business case, for who's actually responsible for the airspace system. So there's a number of complex issues that are wrapped up in the business element of this, but I think there's certainly a string that we can pull all the way through this to ensure that we get from concept exploration to implementation in a short amount of time.
Frank, I think a lot of what you said is absolutely key, and obviously, looking at the different business structures and different business models, we must change. It's not a point anymore as should we change, it's a must change. But Naveen, kind of over to you a little bit, because you, out of the five of us, have probably spent more time on the Hill than maybe us together even. But just from your perspective, are there policy challenges around changing that business structure?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gene. Just in the realm of policy challenges and questions. So, the business structure itself is evolving. I think, again, the new entrants have brought a lot of their own, created and brought a lot of their own services that are complementary to what the FAA already provides. And, I think sometimes our regulatory framework and the Federal Aviation Act is pretty broad. And in fact, I think that's a really positive factor, that the fact that the law that was written in 1958 that created the FAA is actually still, in fact, quite flexible and provides, it's still a relevant and functional framework. I think some of the challenges are the technology. So, for instance, a lot of the challenges that the drone industry faced, that regulations were written for manned aircraft. And to Mike's point about pilot looking out the window, do you really need to keep a copy of the AFM in the aircraft if the aircraft is a 3-pound drone? So those are the kinds of unusual things that came up. And another challenge, I would just say broadly in this discussion about NAS modernization, that I think engineers and scientists like you guys could come up with the best designed, best conceived, best executed plan for re-architecting the airspace. However, if one of those flight paths goes over the home of the fraternity brother of the wrong congressman, well then, those are the kinds of things that end up getting congressional attention and can really affect things. So I just mentioned that as it's just a persistent issue that comes up in any question of airspace, whether it's flight paths here in Washington near Reagan Airport, or in the New York area or Southern California. It's just a persistent issue over time. Thanks, Gene.
Yeah, no, thanks for being great points there. So we talked a little bit about COVID, and we all live in this new environment, right? I remember in March and April talking about, are we ever going to return to normal? And I don't ever think there is a normal anymore, right? Or what will be the new normal? But with social distancing, which is a word we never used until March, right? With social distancing, you know, trying to keep separation, you know, kind of more controlled private transportation, you know, and let's just say, you know, cargo, you know, or Amazon delivery, right? So the drone industry and the urban air mobility industry are looking at, you know, they're looking more and more promising, more and more important these days, right? Because, you know, much rather have a, you know, small lightweight drone drop off a package at my front door than, you know, some UPS guy and I got to pick up his pen and sign for it, right? So as they start becoming more important, do we think that the NAS is prepared to enter into this kind of AI or autonomous controlled private transportation, such as you know, Uber Eats via urban air mobility or something to that effect? So, Dennis, what are some of your thoughts around that?
Well, as we're looking at that, we have to recognize that our current, the traditional aircraft Part 121 has been on this evolution from being procedure-based to radar-based to trajectory-based. And what's happened in the urban air mobility, advanced air mobility UTM space is they're going straight to performance-based. And I think that performance-based move makes that more possible than having that legacy of going from, you know, procedural, you know, radar trajectory. And with that, there are things that have to happen. We've got to understand the performance capabilities of the vehicles and services. We've got to trust the information about those vehicles, services, the systems, the infrastructure, really at every moment in time. We got to trust that performance is being monitored either by people or machines, and corrections being made in real time. So I'm optimistic that there can be a lot of progress made there.
Great, Mike. You look like you've got that moment where you just want to say something about it.
No, I can't get out of my head. Dennis just hit the nail on the head a lot. So, Gene, you mentioned social distancing, and the self-separation that we've been trying to implement in this country for the last 7 months or so. And I'll tell you, if my grocery store is any indication, between an inability to look at what direction a 6-foot-long arrow is pointing on an aisle, or a spot on the floor that says stand here that is apparently too hard to be complied with, I'm not sure where I hold faith in that. But I'm thankful that people like you and my peers here are responsible for the NAS and not the average person that I run into at the grocery store. So no, for me, you're not going to solve all those issues unless you get the stakeholders all together like we're trying to do. And Frank said the P word first, I think, today, policy. And then Naveen ran with it, and Dennis talked about it as well. You can't build it and then worry about the policy. You can't plan the operation and do the policy and then try to build it. Technology, operations, and policy all have to be worked together. And they have to be worked and coordinated, not just among stakeholders, right, but within stakeholder groups, right? Think of how many times we've been involved in conversations where you think you get somewhere, and then the next meeting, a different person shows up, right? And so decisions it's going to fail if it depends on which individual is representing a particular party in a particular conversation. It's just not the best way to go about it, right? So the most important thing is to make sure that everybody is not only working together at a place like the Blue Skies Initiative and places like RTCA, but that we're hitting the policy issues concurrently as they come up with the technology and the operations issues, because Dennis touched on a number of programs that have had a lot of recent success, and they did that to a great extent. I would argue that some of them learned from the policy failures of their predecessors before, right? Datacom took a long time to get to where we are right now. I know about that one personally. So I said it's about the stakeholders. It's about stakeholder organizations making sure that they're on the same page with each other. And it's about everybody being open and honest and not running away from hard problems. Our business doesn't run from hard problems. We take them on. And I feel like every now and again we get a hard problem in front of us, and instead of latching down and solving it, we may demagogue it and make it go away and then come back to it in 5 years. So let's not do that anymore.
Mike, thanks. So folks, that about wraps up our time here. And as you can tell, there's some excitement, enthusiasm in each one of the panelists. I mean, I think these guys could agree we could do this for 8 straight hours and not miss a beat, right? Because not only is this a very, very important topic, but it's something that we feel needs to be addressed today, right? I said it a long time ago from stage that, you know, our our future aviation ecosystem is changing. And we have one or two ways of doing it. Either we can help define what that future looks like, or our future will be defined for us, right? And so I think you've heard from the panelists. I think you've heard from Terry and myself. There's a lot of efforts going on within industry to kind of get this connected, to integrate and harmonize all these modernization efforts that need to take place across the NAS to enable those future entrants and technologies to happen. And Mike, I'll still go back and say that my favorite cartoon of ever was the Jetsons, right? And so that's what we're looking at here in the next 15, 20 years, hopefully. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to thank each one of you for participating today. Wish we could have gotten to all the questions. We're being followed by two great individuals that are going to give a tech talk, Paul Rinaldi and Paul Winstanley. Really looking forward to hearing from those guys. But I want to thank you, panelists. And Terry, let me bring it back up to you.
Hey, thanks, Gene, and to all the panelists. A really great discussion. I know we had a recent discussion at the last Blue Skies Initiative XCOM about the need not only for understanding what needs to be implemented, but how are we going to actually do it? What's the secret sauce? I think you guys really started touching on that. So great discussion. Really, really appreciated. I now want to show a short video from one of our sponsors, Collins Aerospace. There's no audio on the video, so there's no need to adjust your volume. So let's go ahead and roll that video. Okay, thank you, Collins Aerospace, for that video. And again, want to take a moment to thank all of our sponsors for today's event. Even in these difficult times, these organizations have been gracious enough to make today's webinar happen. As I mentioned earlier, several of our sponsors have some materials for you available here. So to access that material, simply click on that handouts button in the handouts section. You'll be able to download them from your computer. So again, in addition to Collins Aerospace, a shout out to NBAA, American Airlines, AOPA, Garmin, MITRE, and Gamma sponsors for today's webinar. Your continued support to the industry and to RTCA is very much appreciated. Now, RTCA serves the aviation industry by providing minimum operational performance standards that serve as the basis for government certification of equipment used by the tens of thousands of aircraft that are flying daily through the world's airspace. And at the core of RTCA are the people, the hundreds of dedicated individuals from the United States and around the world who come together to develop comprehensive, industry-vetted and endorsed recommendations. Every year, RTCA presents awards to some of our special committee members who have made significant contributions to RTCA standards development and our documents. So I'd like to invite Karen Hoffman, one of RTCA's program directors, to join us to make a presentation to a set of committee awards for this month. Karen?
First of all, our first committee is Special Committee 222, which is the Aeronautic Mobile Satellite Route Services, AMSRS. Special Committee 222 was formed in 2008. Originally implemented changes needed to add safety service capabilities to switchback Swift broadband. Through its tenure, they have produced 10 documents and are regarded in use of the mid-L-band satellite spectrum for ancillary terrestrial component and the effects of AMSRS, minimum performance characteristics. They began working jointly with EuroK Working Group 82 in early 2015 to allow collaborative efforts in this arena. DO 343 Bravo, the minimum aviation system performance standard for AMSRS, data and voice communications supporting required communications performance, that's RCP, and required surveillance performance, RSP, was published in March of 2019. The MASP contains a new information appendix detailing the regulatory environment required relative to the dual dissimilar SATCOM approval without the technical investigation of any specific approach. Being recognized by SC222 for outstanding leadership in the development of this document is Armin Schlethruth from DFS, Germany, and as significant contributor, Alan Schuster-Bruce from Inmarsat in London, UK. And I want to congratulate both Armin and Alan. Special Committee 222 also completed DO 262 Delta, the minimum operational performance standards for avionics supporting new generation satellite systems, also published in March of 2019. This document was done in parallel and is a coordinated effort with the changes to DO 343 Bravo, with associated activity on hardware changes and test procedures. Being recognized by SC222 as a significant contributor for DO 262 Delta is Radek Zaroba from Honeywell in Brno, Czech Republic. Congratulations, Radek. Our second group of committee awards are being recognized by members of Special Committee 206, Aeronautical Information and Meteorological Data Link Services. Since it was established in 2005, RTCA SC 206 has produced 13 documents to further define the requirements for Worldwide Flight Information Services, FIS, and Aeronautical Information Services, AIS, functions and can support global AIM concept. These comprise those both air and ground subsystems and functions that permit the timely exchange of aeronautical data between aircraft, all classes, and ATS authorities and/or service providers. DO 358 Alpha and DO 358 Alpha Supplement, the minimum operation performance, or the MOPS, for Flight Information Services Broadcast, the FISB, with Universal Access Transceiver, UAT, was published in June of 2019. These documents consider an equipment configuration consisting of the airborne processing and cockpit display of aeronautical and meteorological data for FISB provided by the FAA. And its supplement is a zip file, which is an archive that contains the test program files described in section 2.4 of the main document. The archive includes 24 sets of test group zip files. Recognized by 206 for outstanding leadership in the development of DO 358 Alpha and its associated supplement are Paul Freeman from L3 Harris, John Ferrara from John Ferrara Consulting, and Eldridge Frazier from the Federal Aviation Administration. And as significant contributors, we have Bill Carson from the MITRE Corporation, Jeremy Holman from Garmin Limited, pictured here with his lovely wife, Sarah, and Brock Laskra also from the MITRE Corporation. Congratulations to Paul, John, Eldridge, Bill, Jeremy, and Brock. As this completes the presentations for our 2020 awards, we want to again congratulate all of our award winners this year and thank our volunteers for their continued support to RTCA committees and providing documents that advance the safety and efficiencies of the aviation system. Back to you, Terry.
Well, thanks, Karen, and my congratulations as well to each of this month's award winners. I'm pleased now to introduce a good friend of RTCA, a good friend of mine, Mr. Paul Rinaldi, who is president of the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, a position he's held since October of 2009 and is now into his unprecedented fourth term as NATCA's president. Paul has enjoyed some tremendous success for NATCA's members by advancing progress and safety in everything that they do. And Paul's joined by Mr. Paul Winstanley, the president of the Global Air Traffic Controllers Alliance, where he's responsible for ensuring that the alliance develops collaborative relationships with the aviation industry and air navigation service providers to enhance safety, assist in the development of technology, and to protect the integrity of the global airspace system. Paul, thank you for being with us today for this month's Tech Talk.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you for the opportunity to have this Tech Talk. Paul and I thought it would be interesting and give a perspective of what it's like in the COVID world on the other side of the frequency. We hear a lot about our aviation partners and what COVID has done to commercial aviation around the world, and it is devastating. But we also want to let you know what's happening on the other side of our frequency. So, Mr. Winstanley.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So COVID-19, who would have thought that would have been witnessing the impact it's had across the aviation sector? Clearly, we've dealt with crisis before in the past. 9/11 has been mentioned this evening, the stock market crash, and also certainly as a European, the effects of the volcano as well. But COVID is different. It felt different from the start, and I don't think we've really seen how much it's actually impacted the whole aviation sector. And as I had said, it's on a complete reset. We've not got a lot of time to talk about it, so I guess I'll get right into it, how it's affected the operation. Well, the first impact was obviously with our colleagues across in the Far East. The Alliance particularly represents controllers from Australia and New Zealand. New Zealand's probably held up as a country that handled the crisis quite efficiently through its air traffic services. As a European, we saw it hit particularly hard in Italy to start with, and NATS, the major NSPs, United Kingdom, initially started to replicate some of the stuff that the Italians had put into process. We quickly put in one-way systems at work. We matched the watch systems to the traffic levels. Hand sanitizers became the norm. We're not in PPE yet, but I'll probably come on to that in a minute once I let Paul have a chance to talk. But we're quite fortunate in the United Kingdom in the sense that we've got plenty of spare workstations, so we could self-isolate or provide the requisite distance between us, which is greater than a meter. We did stop training. We'll talk about how we're going to recommence training in a minute, I guess. But that's what we did. In the sense, it was quite easy. In the towers, it's a little bit more difficult, obviously because of the nature of the operation and the proximity that individual controllers have to work in. So again, reduced traffic schedule, watch schedules to match the traffic. And the introduction of standby shifts and on-call, which not particularly common, certainly not common in the United Kingdom, not really common across Europe. And again, that was to ensure that people were kept safe as possible, and we could still supply the number of people required to run the operation. And that's kind of what we did, and that was replicated across ANSPs across Europe. And as I said, our colleagues both in Australia, New Zealand, and Spain in particular. Paul?
So as we heard in the panel before us, that air traffic controllers cannot telecommute. And we had to figure out how we were going to keep the system running and keep our members and our controllers around the world safe at work. PPE was definitely one of them, social distancing, the term we've never heard before March, obviously, but we experienced here in the States, a facility shut down. Midway was shut down for 7 days. Las Vegas Tower was shut down for about 6 or 7 days, and we quickly realized, working with the agency, that we have to come up with, standby crews to get these facilities cleaned and get a fresh crew back in, because back then you didn't know exactly what type of surfaces were contaminated and exactly how long it would take to get people cleared to come back to work. We work collaboratively with the agency, has worked. About mid-July, we mandated PPE, masks, and shields because it's a profession that you truly cannot social distance with. So we really focused on that with the agency. And now we're focusing on bringing our trainees back. We're about 50%, give and take the day, 50–60% of normal traffic. But we need to start bringing our trainees back to focus on training so that when this pandemic is over, and I'll knock on wood that it happens actually sooner than later, we can get back to some type of normal traffic patterns and traffic flows.
The training bit is quite an interesting one. So the Australians never stop training, they continue to train, although they've introduced PPE now, particularly, as you'll probably be aware, in Victoria, around Melbourne, which has had a second spike. In the United Kingdom, we stopped training. We've only just starting to see those people who've already graduated from our air traffic college come back into the system. We currently don't have any form of PPE in the operation. It's not because we're about to leave Europe. We do seem to be about a bit of an outlier when it comes to Europe. Most of my colleagues in Europe are in masks. Some are in gloves as well, where they're in the operation. We're not at the moment in the United Kingdom, and that's primarily, as I said before, because our centres are big enough with enough redundancy, enough spare workstations to keep us apart. However, having said that, as Paul's alluded to, we are currently trialling both visors and face masks, so we can commence training of those students that we have in the system. What's really unfortunate is that you know, some ANSPs, without getting too political tonight, can suffer from corporate memory loss. When we've been here before, and in the United Kingdom, we're about to release 122 of our college students out of the system, which I think is particularly short-sighted. We're not the only ANSP to be doing that currently. North of yourselves in the United States, the Canadians have done the same. They've let go all of their trainees out of the system. Now, that's probably, in our view, a knee-jerk reaction to the situation that we find ourselves in. You know, the traffic will come back. There is an international shortage of air traffic controllers in the world. Letting the trainees go at the moment, I think, is really short-sighted. I understand the commercial aspects of air traffic and the models that we all have to work in, but we've been here before, and it takes an awful long time to recover once you start taking trainees out of the manpower planning processes that we have. We're still going to have people retiring. People are not going to stay on. People will retire, and therefore we will probably see that shortage continue for some while. Fortunately, that's not the state that's currently Paul is experiencing in the United States.
Yeah, fortunately, the FAA realizes that we're looking at at least 3 years to make somebody a fully certified air traffic controller. We started at a very low level of fully certified controllers when this pandemic happened or started, and the FAA is really focused on continuing to train because it's gonna handcuff the ability to get our aviation system back to normal if we don't have enough controls in the system. And we heard about the panel earlier about subject matter experts to get involved in modernization in the new initiatives. Now would be a perfect time to really focus on what is needed in the system. And certainly air traffic controller trainees across the world is definitely needed to get us up and running. And certainly the next level of technology would be very helpful also. While we're running at a very, at 50% level, we could really focus on implementing some technology.
Yeah, and that's why collaboration is key in all this. The Alliance stands for collaboration, not just through national boundaries, but across international boundaries. Air traffic control and the HM systems are global now. Technology is going to have a massive impact on our profession going forward, and that's why collaboration more than ever is required. They say a crisis brings out the best in people. Unfortunately, it can sometimes bring out the worst in people. And that's why it's really important that no matter how difficult conversations are, You know, we work together. You know, a problem shared or a problem aired is a problem shared, and that's what we need to be doing here to make sure that the aviation sector that we all love gets back on its feet as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Well, it looks like we're up against our clock here, and we would love to talk about this more and given opportunities, and we'll bring Terry back into the picture here. Thank you, Terry. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. And Paul, great perspectives. I think a great book in there to our previous panel. It was great hearing your perspectives during this unprecedented time in our history. Well, this concludes today's webinar, and my sincere appreciation to Gene Hayman and his panelists, Mark Matus, Dennis Sawyer, Mike Hawthorne, and Naveen Rao. And my thanks again to Paul Rinaldi and Paul Winstanley for your valuable participation this afternoon. And of course, congratulations again to each of our committee award winners. Again, thank you to our sponsors for today's webinar, Collins Aerospace, the National Business Aviation Association, American Airlines, the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, Garmin, MITRE, and the General Aviation Manufacturers Association. And remember to go to that handout section on this platform to get more information about our sponsors. For the audience, thank you for joining us today and making us a part of your day. I hope you found today's presentations to be educational, inspiring, and evolving. And again, these webinars are being recorded, so if you want to review anything presented today, you can do so on our RTCA YouTube channel, and all of our previous webinars are there as well. Please join us again next month on November 18th at 1:00 p.m. We're going to be featuring Mr. Steve Kramer, the Director of the Air Navigation Bureau for the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, in Montreal. And Steve's an internationally recognized icon in aviation. He's going to be offering the audience some unique perspectives on where we are as an industry and some of his thoughts on where we need to go. I'm also excited to have Mr. Jay Merkel join us for a tech talk. Jay serves as the Executive Director and Head of FAA's UAS Integration Office. So I hope you'll be able to join us. Again, everyone, thank you for being with us and have a great day.